At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFI without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's I Am Duck. Let's begin. The waiver was, in Fia's opinion, a masterpiece of absurdist legal maneuvering. She was the sole student who had undertaken the monumental task of reading all 112 supplemental pages for the Hazard Designation 15 immersion program, a decision she now profoundly regretted. "You have to hear this," she said, her voice a dry monotone that sliced through the sterile, recycled air of the starship's cabin. Jib, floating inverted nearby while attempting to juggle his shimmering Nutrigel spheres, made a muffled sound of acknowledgement. The student acknowledges that Hazard Designation 15 may contain topographical anomalies or biological entities that are suboptimal for continued existence. It gets better. The Galactic Scholastic Council accepts zero liability for spontaneous disassembly of students at the molecular level, planetary consumption, or existential dread resulting from exposure to non-sanctioned ecosystems. Jib fumbled a sphere, which drifted with agonizing slowness toward a ventilation grate. Why do we even require inoculations against airborne fungal spores and waterborne parasites? It's a controlled environment. Professor Malian assured us the Caldera Preserve outpost is hermetically sealed. What's going to get in? A poorly sanitized historical text? From her post at the navigation console, Hades scoffed without diverting her gaze from her data pad. That's standard boilerplate for any world possessing a non-sterilized atmosphere, Jeb. It's legalese composed by paranoid logic engines. The probability of encountering anything genuinely hazardous is statistically negligible. We're descending into a pre-sanitized reinforced biodome. The most dangerous entity we'll encounter is Malian's tenure review presentation. At that moment, a klaxon screamed through the cabin. The sound was so violent and primal it felt like the ship itself had been physically wounded. The soft, ambient illumination died, replaced by the angry pulsing strobes of emergency red. An almost imperceptible tremor ran through the deck plates, followed by a much harder one that rattled their teeth. "Power surge," Hades snapped. Her right hand swept across the lower console, flicking a sequence of 3 physical switches, while her left traced a glowing blue circuit path on the main screen. "Just a minor fluctuation from atmospheric entry. Nothing to—" The ship plunged. The sickening, gut-wrenching drop sent Jib pinwheeling through the zero-G cabin and slammed fire back into her crash couch. The gentle hum of the gravity generators died with a mournful whine, and a half-G of planetary pull grabbed them with rude insistence. "Minor atmospheric turbulence," Professor Malian announced from the command chair, his voice a full octave higher than its usual condescending tenor. He gripped the armrest so tightly his long, spindly knuckles were bone white. "Perfectly normal for a Designation 15 entry. An excellent, unscheduled, teachable moment." Had he ignored him, diagnostic screens once displaying serene green flight paths now cascaded with a waterfall of crimson error messages. "The nav computer is corrupted. I've lost primary flight control. Oh, it's defaulting to a high-energy biome coordinate. Oh, I can't override the sequence." The ship shook, a deep, bone-rattling shudder, as if some colossal, unseen beast held it in its jaws. Jib, tangled in his own limbs, emitted a series of high-pitched yelps that escalated into a full-blown scream. Fire, strapped securely in her couch, frantically keyed in emergency overrides. Every command she entered was met with a blunt, final error message. Sequence failed. Manual intervention locked. Outside the forward view screen, the serene blue and white marble of Earth vanished, replaced by a churning, angry vortex of green and brown. The ship no longer flew. It fell. The final descent was a cacophony of annihilation. the shriek of tortured metal, the explosive pop of failing conduits, the groaning protest of a frame designed for the silent vacuum of space being torn asunder by a thick, soupy atmosphere. The end arrived without a climactic bang, but with a sickening, final crunch, the sound of advanced alloy surrendering to primordial mud. Then a heavy stillness pressed in on them, broken only by the ominous, rhythmic dripping of fluid, and, from somewhere outside, a low, pervasive, and utter alien buzzing. The main hatch, buckled but miraculously functional, hissed open with a pneumatic sigh of defeat. The smell hit them first. It was an olfactory assault, a physical presence that slammed into their sinuses and coated the insides of their lungs. It was the scent of 1 billion years of life and death cycles, of wet, rich earth, of pungent, cloying blossoms, and of something deeper, the thick, coppery stench of decay. Jib gagged, a wet, heaving sound. "What is that? It smells like the inside of a sanitation unit's digestive tract. Oh!" The humidity followed, a suffocating wet blanket of heat that made their sleek silver jumpsuits instantly clammy and their pale skin prickle. Their large, dark eyes, accustomed to the soft, perpetual twilight of their domed homeworld, struggled to narrow against the harsh, dappled sunlight filtering through a dense canopy of monstrously large leaves. Then they saw it, their first unfiltered view of Earth. Just yards from the crippled ship, in a stretch of murky brown water, a 12-foot alligator was locked in a brutal, thrashing death roll with an equally massive American crocodile. They churned the water into a pink-tinged froth, their armored bodies slamming against each other with the force of small asteroids. They had studied xenobiology from sterile vids that depicted sanitized predator-prey dynamics. This was a meat grinder. Their 3 sets of large sensitive eyes widened in shared synchronized horror. They had witnessed more raw, unfiltered life in the past 10 seconds than in their entire pampered existences. Before they could fully process the reptilian deathmatch, a hazy cloud rose from the water surface. It drifted towards them, a ghostly mist that dissolved into thousands. No, millions of tiny winged forms. Mosquitoes. Hades' datapad chirped. "Local fauna analysis," she muttered, her voice trembling slightly. "Order Diptera. Family Calicidae. Primary dietary requirement, vertebrate blood." The cloud descended. Professor Malian, ever desperate to project an authority he did not possess, strode onto the ramp. His face was a thin veneer of academic superiority layered over a chasm of shrieking terror. "Students, remain calm," he commanded, his voice cracking. "Standard procedure dictates we assess the..." Ah! His polished boot, designed for the perfectly level, high-traction flooring of a university hall, met the mud-slicked metal of the ramp. His spindly limbs pinwheeled through the air in a display of comedic, uncoordinated panic. He landed with a wet, undignified splush in the swampy water at the bottom. He came up sputtering, covered from head to toe in a thick coating of green algae and black, foul-smelling mud. His sudden appearance startled a clutch of smaller, previously unseen alligators sunning themselves on a nearby bank. They erupted into a chaotic frenzy of hissing and splashing, a chorus of reptilian disapproval. As Malian scrambled back towards the ship, slipping and sliding like a newborn herbivore, Hades shouted the final piece of bad news from a frantic diagnostic on the ship's internal systems. "Professor, the long-range comms are completely offline. The primary beacon's casing is fractured. The signal degrades into static a few meters from the hull. We're cut off." The words struck Malian like a plasma bolt. This was reality, not academic theory or statistical probability, the realization that they were truly, utterly stranded on a planet that had just tried to drown him in filth and feed him to its welcoming committee, shattered his fragile sanity. His large, dark eyes, merely wide with panic before, now dilated into black pools of abject terror. He shoved past the stunned students, his movements fueled by all-consuming fear. He scrambled back into the relative safety of the ship, his voice a high-pitched shriek that echoed across the water. "This entire planet is a biological meat grinder! Oh, this is hell!" He slammed his hand on the hatch control. With a hiss and a heavy clunk, the ramp retracted and the armored door slid shut. A moment later, his voice, tinny and hysterical, crackled over their personal comm units, thankfully still on a local network. "Effective immediately. I resign my post as Xenobiology Field Trip Coordinator. The mission is aborted. This planet is unfit for sapient life, non-sapient life, and possibly even silicon-based life forms. I am initiating a full lockdown. Do not attempt a re-entry. You are all contaminated." A final definitive locking mechanism clunked into place from inside. Hades stared at the sealed hatch, her daughter-pad held limply in her hand. "He can't do that." "He just did," Fire said, her voice grim. "Main systems will go dark in 48 hours, Hades said, her tone now hollow. "The primary power cells are fractured and leaking. They're dumping waste heat directly into the fuselage. Emergency life support can scrub the air for 72 hours after that, but it can't handle the thermal load. The interior will reach sterilization temperatures." They were alone, abandoned, stranded on a hazard designation 15 world by a tenured coward. Fire pulled up the topographical map she had downloaded from the supplemental materials. Their only option was a single tiny icon, 20 miles away through the endless, buzzing, stinking green, a ranger tower. The first hour of their trek was a masterclass in misery. The mosquitoes, a relentless whining armada, treated their pale, sterile skin like a royal buffet. The Aethelans had no concept of an insect bite. The closest they came was a mild allergic reaction to synthesized pollen substitutes. This was a violation. "Why aren't the suits protecting us?" Jib yelped, slapping at a fresh bite on his arm. Hades grimaced as she examined her own jumpsuit. "These were designed for comfort in controlled environments. The fabric is a thin, breathable polymer composite, utterly useless against this planet's vicious insect life. Their proboscis are penetrating the weave." Every bite swelled into a painful, inflamed red welt that itched with a ferocity bordering on agony. Their personal energy shields designed to stop a plasma bolt did nothing. The insects were too small, too numerous, and their flight patterns too erratic for the targeting systems to track. The shields failed to recognize them as a threat. "My personal integrity field is being violated by flying vermin! Ah!" Jib howled, slapping his own neck with a sound like a wet towel hitting tile. He was already covered in dozens of angry red bumps. "This is unacceptable!" Hades, slapping her own arm with a grimace, muttered, "Of course the maid spray nanites struggle. They're programmed for sterile, lab-grown pathogens, not this primordial bacterial cocktail. Every bite introduces a billion new unregistered microbes into our systems. It's like trying to catalog a library by catching each book as it's thrown at you during an explosion." They burnt through 2 of their 5 precious med spray packs in that first hour. These sophisticated nanites waged a losing war against the sheer biological chaos of the swamp. The swelling would recede for a few minutes before a new squadron of mosquitoes descended to begin the process all over again. Fire, forcing herself to lead, pushed aside a thick, draping curtain of what her scanner identified as Spanish moss. It felt like walking through a dead man's beard. On the other side, she nearly planted her boot on a thick, coiled serpent resting on a patch of sun-dappled mud. It made no sound. It simply opened its mouth in a silent, terrifying gape, revealing a ghostly white interior, a pure biological threat display. Gibbs' shriek was immediate and ear-splitting. Heidi, her mind defaulting to analysis in the face of terror, blurted out, "Warning! Unidentified reptilian, displaying a deimatic threat posture, mouth agape. It's attempting to appear larger." Fire's own fear was a cold knot in her stomach. Appendix C, Section 4. Unexpected carnivore encounter. Her mind screamed. It said nothing about this. The manual never mentioned silent, white-mouthed demons. Jib, in his panicked backpedal, tripped over a gnarled cypress root and went down hard, creating a domino effect of flailing limbs and terrified yelps. The snake, a water moccasin, seemed utterly unimpressed by the screaming. Lanky aliens. With a slow, languid grace, it closed its mouth, turned, and smoothly slithered away into the undergrowth, leaving them with pounding hearts and a new, profound terror of the ground itself. Every root became a snake, every vine a potential constrictor. Disoriented by their panic and desperate to put distance between themselves and the spot where the snake had been, Jib plowed ahead without looking. He took one step into a patch of ground that looked perfectly solid, and then, with a wet, sucking sound, it gave way. He sank to his chest in seconds, the thick, soupy mud closing around him like a hungry mouth. He cried out, his voice choked with terror and disgust. "Oh, it's eating me! Oh, the planet is eating me!" His panicked flailing only made him sink faster. "Stop struggling!" Heidi snapped, her analytical mind overriding her fear. "You're decreasing your density and increasing the substrate's liquefaction. You're making it worse." She began calculating vectors and load tolerances out loud, a string of technical jargon that was both impressive and completely useless. "Fire! Find a liana, a wooden vine. Minimum tensile strengths of 300 ethylene newtons." Treating it like a physics problem from a textbook, she guided Fire in finding a long, sturdy vine. Then she directed a whimpering Jib on how to loop it under his arms. Together, she and Fire hauled the mud-caked, sputtering, and deeply humiliated Aethelin back onto solid ground. It was their first real moment of adapting their intellect to this chaotic hell. Jib lay on the ground gasping and covered in a substance so vile it seemed to offend the very concept of cleanliness. Heidi, driven by her unquenchable need to categorize everything, pulled out her datapad and aimed it at the mud pit. A moment later, the device chimed. She read the screen, and her normally pale face contorted in a mask of profound disgust. "Analysis complete," she announced grimly. "Substrate composed of 98% decaying organic matter, 2% Procyon loader fecal particulate." Jib wiped a smear of brown from his cheek, looking confused. "What's a Procyon loader?" Heidi's datapad whirred for a moment. "Cross-referencing with local unsecured data networks. One moment." A new line of text appeared on her screen. She stared at it, her expression hardening. "Apparently, the dominant species. Colloquialism is trash panda. My processors feel insulted." She took a deep, shuddering breath. This entire planet is a toilet." As dusk painted the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, they realized they were being watched. A prickling on the back of their necks, the ancient hardwired instinct of prey, came first. Then they saw them, two glowing yellow eyes, utterly still observing them from the dense, dark tree line. Heidi scanned a word. "Puma concolor coriae," she whispered, the words barely audible. "Apex predator. Solitary hunter. Extremely territorial." A Florida panther. It moved with a silence more terrifying than any roar. It was a muscular shadow, a ghost in the twilight, flowing between the trees without snapping a twig. Fire, falling back on the risk assessment training she'd memorized from the waiver's appendix, shoved her friends into a small clearing. Back to back, Form a defensive triangle. We must appear larger. They huddled together. 3 trembling figures in shiny silver, their high-tech flashlights cutting pathetic, trembling beams into the oppressive gloom. The panther circled them for what felt like an eternity. It was a patient, calculating predator, weighing the risk versus the reward of attacking these strange, noisy, stick-like creatures. Finally, apparently deciding they were too pathetic and weird to be worth the effort, the yellow eyes blinked once and then vanished. The panther melted back into the night, as silently as it had appeared. The encounter left them trembling, raw-nerved and stripped of their last vestiges of galactic superiority. As if summoned by their despair, the sky itself joined the assault. The humid air grew heavy, thick and charged with an energy they could feel on their skin. The distant buzzing of insects was replaced by the low rumble of thunder. The sky turned from bruised purple to a deep, menacing black. Lightning cracked, a brilliant epileptic flash that illuminated the swamp in terrifying detail, revealing monstrous, twisted shapes in the trees and dark, slick forms moving in the water. Then the rain came. It was a torrential, warm downpour of deluge that fell in solid, heavy sheets. It soaked them to the bone in seconds, plastering their jumpsuits to their skinny frames. The ground turned to soap, flooding the low-lying areas and forcing them to wade into waist-deep, opaque black water, where unseen things brushed and bumped against their legs with unnerving frequency. They were cold, miserable, terrified, and on the absolute verge of giving up. They huddled together against the massive gnarled trunk of a cypress tree, the relentless rain drumming on the canopy above, each of them lost in their own private hell. It was then that they saw it. Through the driving sheets of rain, a flickering yellow light. It was small, unsteady, but it was unmistakably artificial. Hope, a feeling they had all but forgotten, flared in their chests. Then they heard the roar, a monstrous, guttural, mechanical roar ripped through the night, followed by a series of coughs and sputters, and then a final wheezing silence. The silence was immediately followed by a string of curses in a language their synaptic interpreters struggled with, finally tagging it as human English, archaic vernacular, highly aggressive. Fearing another larger predator but too desperate to care, they waded towards this sound, pushing through the cold, dark water, their hearts pounding with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. They found him in a small clearing on a slightly raised patch of ground, next to a bizarre flat-bottomed boat with a giant fan caged on the back. He was a silhouette of pure primal competence, backlit by a single swaying lantern. A wrench was clutched in his hand as he delivered a final, damning verdict on his airboat's engine. He was Rick Mallory, and he was having a bad night. The carburetor was shot, he was out of jerky, and the storm was making the mosquitoes particularly vicious. He was about to give the engine one last, hopeful kick when he looked up. Emerging from the darkness and the rain were 3 of the strangest damn things he had ever seen. They were abnormally tall and thin, like starved greyhounds stretched into humanoid form. They wore shiny, tattered silver suits and had huge, dark, terrified eyes that seemed to take up half of their pale faces. They were covered in mud, leaves, and a truly epic number of mosquito bites. Rick froze, wrench still in hand. He squinted, the rain dripping from the brim of his worn leather hat. He took a long, silent moment to process the scene. Before he spoke, he took a step to his right, his boot finding solid earth without him even looking down. A small, unconscious movement that kept him from sinking into the soft mud the aliens were already struggling with. Then he muttered quietly to himself, his voice a low rumble. "Okay, Rick, that's it. You gotta lay off the moonshine." He seemed to decide that questioning reality was significantly more work than just accepting it. A nearby gator, probably curious about the commotion, surfaced with a soft ripple, its eyes reflecting the lantern light. Rick, without taking his eyes off the three aliens, calmly reached into his boat, picking up a signal flare, and scraped the cap against the striker. With a hiss and a flash of red, he tossed it a few feet away from the gator's snout. The reptile, annoyed, sank back into the depths with a flick of its tail. Rick turned his full attention back to the shivering creatures. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. "You lost?" he asked, his voice a slow, southern drawl that stretched the words out like warm taffy. Fire's synaptic interpreter, ever literal, chirped in her ear. "Query, are you a collective entity that has misplaced itself?" Hades offered a more formal interpretation. "Inquiry, has your group deviated from its intended path?" Jibs just flashed a large, blinking question mark. Rick sized up their pathetic, shivering forms with a deep, world-weary sigh that seemed to carry the weight of every dumb tourist he'd ever had to rescue. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at Hades' arm, which was swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and was an angry, alarming shade of purple. "That's a bad 'un," he pronounced, the diagnosis delivered with the finality of a judge's sentence. Before any of them could react, he reached into a waterproof bag in his boat and produced two items that were not in any Aetherlan first aid manual: a half-empty bottle of cheap amber-colored whiskey and a thick roll of dull gray utility bonding filament. He uncorked the bottle, and a sharp, acrid chemical stench filled the air. Completely alien to their sanitized world, he then unceremoniously poured a generous amount of the liquid directly over Hades' savaged arm. She yelped, a sharp cry of pain and shock, as the alcohol hit her 1,000 open wounds. "Sterilized it?" Rick grunted, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. He then tore off a long strip of the bonding filament with his teeth, the sound a loud rip in the quiet between thunderclaps. He slapped it firmly over the worst of the bites. The tacky, aggressive adhesive felt bizarre and violating against Hades' skin. "Keeps the mud out," he explained. He turned to the other two, holding up the bottle and filament expectantly. Fire and Jib exchanged a look of sheer stomach-dropping horror. This was barbarism, not medicine, but the itching was driving them mad, and this creature, this human, seemed to know what he was doing. Reluctantly, they submitted to the bizarre, painful ritual. Once they were all packed up with primitive adhesives, Rick rummaged in his bag again and pulled out a piece of what looked like dark, leathery wood. He offered it to them. "Y'all look like you could use a bite to eat." Jib recoiled as if he'd been offered a live snake, his eyes wide with terror. "A bite? Something else is going to bite us? Is that a local custom? A greeting? Do we bite it back?" Rick just stared at him for a long, unblinking moment, his expression a perfect mixture of confusion and pity. He shook his head slowly, then took a bite of the beef jerky himself, chewing with a quiet determination. Fire, using an interpreter to piece together their story, explained their crash, their cowardly professor, and their desperate goal, the Ranger Tower. Rick listened, nodded slowly, chewing his jerky. When she was finished, he grunted. "Ranger Tower. Yeah, I know it. Carburetor shot, but I can get it running. Hop on." The airboat ride was a unique form of hell the Aetherlans had never conceived of. Their own ship traveled in perfect, silent, inertialess grace. This was the exact opposite. The moment Rick got the engine to catch, it erupted with a deafening, full-body vibrating roar that drowned out all thought, all fear, all reason. The entire world was reduced to pure, overwhelming noise. Rick steered with one hand on a simple lever, a silhouette of calm against the chaos, as the boat skimmed across the black water at a speed that felt suicidal. A cold, foul-smelling spray blasted their faces, carrying with it the taste of mud and algae. In the intermittent, strobing flashes of light, they saw they were hurtling through a tunnel of twisted, grasping mangrove roots and past floating logs that might be logs or might be alligators. It was impossible to tell. Rick casually dodged obstacles they couldn't even see, occasionally humming an off-key tune that was completely swallowed by the engine's fury. Jib, who had complained about every single aspect of the last few hours, was, for the first time, completely silent. His mouth was wide open in a continuous high-pitched scream of pure, undiluted terror, a scream that was utterly lost in the mechanical hurricane around them. The ride ended as abruptly as it began. Rick cut the engine. The sudden silence that fell was as violent and disorienting as the noise it replaced. Their ears rang. Their bones still vibrated in the sudden quiet, punctuated only by the drip of rain and the chorus of frogs. They saw their destination. The Ranger Tower was a skeletal, rusted metal structure, a lattice of corroded iron that climbed into the storm-tossed canopy and disappeared. It leaned at a precarious angle, looking less like a point of rescue and more like a death trap purpose-built for tetanus infections. Guarding its base, lounging in the shallow water like a scaly, armored god, was the largest alligator any of them had ever seen. It was a prehistoric monster, a living relic from a crueler age. They froze solid. This was the final boss of this nightmarish world. Hades' scanner identified it as an adult male, approximately 15 feet in length, with significant scarring around its left eye socket. Rick just sighed. It was the sound of a man being deeply, personally inconvenienced. He grabbed a metal paddle from his boat and waded into the knee-deep water, straight towards the colossal reptile. "Damn it, Jib! We talked about this!" he yelled at the gator, his voice echoing in the sudden calm. "This is my spot on midweek rotations. You get the North Bank." The Aethelans stared, their minds completely unable to process what was happening. "Don't you give me that look," Rick continued, pointing the pedal at the beast. "I know you stole my cooler back in '09. Had a whole six-pack of Shiner Bach in there. Now go on, get! I got tourists." He started banging the pedal against the water and the tower's rusted leg, creating a series of loud metallic clangs. The colossal predator, Big Jib, lifted his ancient head from the water. It gave Rick a lazy, one-eyed stare filled with the pure reptilian contempt of a creature that has been at the top of the food chain for 65 million years. Then, with a great, heaving sigh that rippled the water around it, Big Jib slowly, reluctantly, pushed its immense bulk into deeper water and disappeared beneath the surface. The alien stared at the spot where the living dinosaur had been, then back at the squishy bipedal mammal who had just bullied it into submission through sheer belligerent familiarity. Their understanding of the galactic power dynamic had just been irrevocably broken. The climb was a vertical nightmare of corroded metal and vertigo. The storm still raged, and the wind tried to peel them from the ladder. Rungs, slick with rain and algae, crumbled under the weight. Heidi, her analytical mind back in its element, called out warnings. Her flashlight beam pinpointed stress fractures and weak points in the rusted structure. "Avoid the third cross brace! It has a 40% corrosion coefficient!" Jib, using a surprising surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, braced a swaying section of the ladder with his own body, hissing through his teeth as the metal groaned. "Go! Now! Before this thing decides to become a submarine!" Near the top, 80 feet above the churning black swamp, a rung gave way completely under Fire's foot. She yelped as her leg plunged into empty air, her grip slipping. She was left dangling by one hand, the world spinning below her. Before Heidi or Jib could even process what was happening, a strong, weathered hand clamped onto the back of her jumpsuit. Rick, who had climbed this treacherous structure with the casual, silent ease of a squirrel, had somehow gotten above her. With a single powerful grunt of effort, he hauled her up as if she weighed nothing and deposited her on the small platform at the summit. "Careful now," he said, his voice completely even. At the windswept top of the tower, Haiti went to work. The ranger station's old communications array was a wreck, but the primary antenna was mostly intact. She tried to open the casing of their damaged distress beacon. "It won't open," she grunted, her slender fingers finding no purchase. "Our sonic driver's afraid. The casing is magnetically sealed, but the impact must have fused the latches." She looked at Rick, her expression a mixture of frustration and dawning realization. "I need something primitive. I need leverage." Rick grunted, pulled a worn multi-tool from his pocket, and flicked out a sturdy-looking pry bar. Haiti took it, the solid weight of the simple machine a strange comfort. After a moment of straining, the casing popped open with a sharp crack. She began frantically rewiring the beacon's power core to the tower's larger, more powerful transmitter. Sparks flew. Haiti muttered a string of technical curses that would have made Rick blush. Finally, she connected the last wire. The beacon, which had been emitting a pathetic, localized crackle, suddenly surged with power. A triumphant cry escaped her lips as the device let out a powerful, coherent pulse of energy. A clean, strong signal amplified by the tower's antenna finally cut through the storm and beamed a tight, focused rescue request towards the heavens. They had done it. A sleek, silent Aethelin rescue vessel descended through a break in the clouds, its searchlights cutting clean, white cones through the morning mist. The storm had passed, leaving the swamp washed clean and steaming in the rising sun. Its ramp lowered, a thing of pristine, sterile beauty that was a stark and jarring contrast to the muddy, living ground. Professor Mallion's frantic, reedy voice shrieked from the ship's external comms. "Remain where you are! A full decontamination quarantine must be established before you can be permitted to reboard. Your biosignatures are off the charts. You're practically crawling with unregistered life forms." The three teens, filthy, bruised, covered in whiskey and violent bandages, and utterly exhausted, looked at each other. They looked at their tattered silver suits, at the mud caked under their fingernails, at the angry red welts still visible on their skin. Then they laughed. It was a tired, ragged, borderline hysterical laugh of triumph. They survived. They had won. Fire turned to Rick. She stood straight and gave him a formal Aethelin salute of immense respect, a two-fingered touch to the forehead and heart. A gesture reserved for saviors and great leaders. "Thank you, Officer Mallory. We are in your debt." Rick just shrugged, spitting a final stream of tobacco juice. "Don't mention it. Y'all just be glad you came when you did." Haiti, her analytical curiosity overriding her exhaustion, tilted her head. "Why is that? Is there a period of increased predator activity we were unaware of?" Rick grinned, a flash of white teeth in his grizzled, weathered face. "Hell, this ain't even hurricane season." The students exchanged a look of profound shared horror and awe as they turned and walked up the clean white ramp. As they did, Fire clutched a strange, resilient swamp flower she had picked, its tough petals a marvel of biological engineering. Jib had a large yellowed gator tooth he'd found near the tower, tucked safely in his pocket, and Haiti, the tech-obsessed analyst who believed all problems could be solved with a superior algorithm, held the role of grey utility bonding filament Rick had given her. She studied it with a reverence she usually reserved for ancient, powerful, and mysterious artifacts. The ramp retracted, the hatch hissed shut, and the rescue ship ascended silently into the clouds. Rick Mallory was left alone in the clearing, the roar of his now working airboat the only sound in the swamp. He was about to climb aboard when his boot kicked something small and metallic on the ground. He bent down and picked it up. It was a small, intricate Aethelin multi-tool, probably dropped by Haiti in her haste. It hummed faintly in his hand, and when he pressed a small stud, it projected a complex shifting pattern of soft blue light. He had no idea what it was for, what incredible technological feats it could perform. Rick turned it over in his hand, nodded to himself, and slipped it into his pocket. Its weird shifting light pattern would probably make a hell of a fishing lure for catching bass. He gave a final look at the pristine alien ship disappearing into the clouds, then turned back to his own vessel. With a pull of the cord, the airboat's engine roared back to life, a familiar grounding sound in the waking swamp. He pointed the bow towards home, leaving nothing behind but a few deep footprints in the mud and the lingering faint scent of cheap whiskey. Inside the rescue vessel, the contrast was a physical shock. The air was cold, sterile, and smelled of ozone and antiseptic. A team of medtechs in full quarantine suits stood waiting, their faces obscured behind polarized visors, holding humming scanners and aerosol sprayers. And there, standing behind them, was Professor Malian. He looked freshly scrubbed and was wearing a new, immaculate silver jumpsuit. His face was a mask of pinched horror and sanctimonious fury. "Unbelievable!" he shrieked, his voice echoing in the pristine chamber. "The bioscans are a catastrophe! You are walking petri dishes. We'll need to put you through 6 cycles of molecular decontamination, at minimum." Jib, who hours ago would have been the first to panic at the word contamination, simply stood his ground. He was caked in mud, his suit was torn, his face was a constellation of welts, but he'd never looked more solid. He reached into his pocket, and his fingers closed around the smooth, hard gator tooth. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He looked the medtechs up and down and then met Malian's terrified gaze with an expression of pure pity. He didn't say a word. Hades stepped forward, holding up the roll of grey utility filament. She turned it over in her hands, her analytical gaze assessing its simple, brutalist form. "Professor," she said, her voice steady and clear, "your statistical models and hermetically sealed theories failed. This primitive polymer substrate with an aggressive non-standard adhesive, this worked. It is an elegant minimalist design of breathtaking efficiency." She looked up from the roll, her large eyes sharp and certain. "We are not contaminated. We are inoculated. There is a difference." Malian spluttered, speechless, as Fire took the final step, positioned herself between her friends and the professor. She wasn't the timid student who quoted waivers anymore. She was a field-tested xenobiologist. She ignored Malian completely, her eyes locking with the helmeted captain of the rescue crew. "Captain," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Log our report. The initial crash was due to an unforeseen geomagnetic anomaly interacting with the local biosphere. The designated landing zone was compromised." She paused, taking a deep breath of the sterile air and finding it thin and unsatisfying. "Hazard designation 15 is insufficient. The supplemental materials are a work of fiction. Nothing in our databases, nothing we've ever learnt, could have prepared us for the sheer, relentless vitality of this world." She gestured out the viewport towards the swirling blue, white, and green marble receding below them. The planet that had tried to eat them, drown them, and exsanguinate them. The planet that had showed them what life truly was. "They don't just survive down there," Fire said, her voice filled with a profound and terrible awe. "They live there. They master it. They tell its apex predators to move. They call it home." The 3 of them stood together, shoulder to shoulder, no longer just students, but survivors. They looked back down at the Earth, a brilliant jewel of deadly, beautiful life. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, shuddering, and permanent respect. Hazard designation 15. It wasn't a warning, it was a title.